Welcome back to Infinite ROI Enterprise, where we extract transcendent patterns from the chaos of conventional thinking. Today we're conducting a thought experiment so radical, it exposes the fundamental architecture of economic control and reveals some rather disturbing realities. We're exploring what happens when money, the primary mechanism of resource allocation and behavioral control, simply becomes obsolete. Not through collapse, but through the kind of systematic evolution that renders entire frameworks of thought suddenly obsolete. This isn't speculative fiction. This is pattern recognition at the highest level. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the monetary system represents one of history's most elaborate forms of intellectual sabotage. The systematic revelation. Consider this scenario. You wake tomorrow and money has become functionally irrelevant. Not destroyed, simply bypassed by superior organizational principles, the way rational accounting methods made Roman numerals obviously inadequate for serious mathematics. Your immediate response reveals something troubling: the degree to which your cognitive architecture has been corrupted by what we might call artificial scarcity programming. You've been operating within a constraint-based optimization problem, but here's the intellectual tragedy. The constraints were artificially imposed by minds that confused complexity with intelligence. The monetary system has forced you to waste extraordinary intelligence on limitations that exist purely as design failures made by previous generations. It's like being forced to solve differential equations with broken tools. Technically possible, but intellectually destructive. Consider the cognitive overhead you've been forced to carry. Portfolio theory, risk modeling, arbitrage calculations, and derivative pricing. That's mathematical brilliance wasted on navigating artificial bottlenecks rather than creating exponential value. The intellectual resources squandered on financial optimization could have solved genuinely important problems. The intelligence redirection protocol. Here's what becomes intellectually disturbing when you examine the system from outside its operational assumptions. You've been trapped in what I call the great cognitive theft, a system that has stolen brilliant minds and convinced them that managing artificial complexity represents genuine intellectual achievement. The historical perspective is particularly damaging. We've been forced to develop increasingly complex mathematical models to optimize distribution of resources that are naturally abundant, then wasted decades perfecting our ability to navigate bottlenecks that were deliberately engineered. It's systematic intellectual vandalism disguised as economic science. The system has convinced you that anxiety about resource access indicates personal inadequacy, when it actually indicates you're responding rationally to deliberately irrational systemic design. It's intellectual manipulation elevated to the level of academic fraud. You've been told that mastering financial sophistication demonstrates intelligence, when it actually demonstrates successful adaptation to systematic intellectual waste, like becoming exceptionally skilled at solving problems that were deliberately created to waste your time. The productivity liberation equation. In a post-monetary reality, something mathematically obvious occurs. Human intelligence gets rescued from the deliberate constraints of artificial problem solving. The cognitive resources currently trapped in financial system navigation suddenly become available for exponential value creation. It's the intellectual equivalent of freeing a particle accelerator from being used to break rocks so it can advance physics. Consider the compound effect. Every mind currently imprisoned in banking, insurance, financial engineering, and monetary system maintenance, suddenly available for breakthrough innovation, advanced systems design, and perhaps finally addressing why our most sophisticated technologies still malfunction predictably. The mathematical implications are genuinely staggering. We're discussing the largest liberation of intellectual capital in human history, comparable to freeing all the minds that were forced to spend centuries perfecting alchemy so they could develop actual chemistry. This isn't resource redistribution, it's cognitive rescue at civilizational scale. The productivity gains would expose previous technological revolutions as artificially constrained. The industry obsolescence cascade. Here's where the analysis becomes particularly intellectually revealing. Entire professional sectors exist purely to manage problems created by deliberately dysfunctional scarcity architectures. The therapeutic industry, for example, has been forced to develop methodologies for treating psychological symptoms of systematically damaging environmental design. You've been told that stress, anxiety, and depression indicate personal dysfunction, when they often indicate accurate assessment of deliberately dysfunctional systems. It's like diagnosing someone with breathing problems while forcing them to live in a smoke-filled room. The pharmaceutical approach treats neurochemical responses to artificial environmental damage rather than addressing the deliberately damaging environmental design. It's treating symptoms of deliberately poor architecture with biochemical interventions rather than eliminating the architectural problems. The entire mental health industry becomes obsolete when you eliminate the systematic psychological damage that artificial scarcity deliberately creates. These professionals would finally be free to redirect their considerable skills toward optimizing human potential rather than treating artificial dysfunction. The control, architecture, analysis. Here's the pattern that becomes visible once you recognize it. You've been operating within a control architecture deliberately designed to convince you that artificial constraints represented natural laws rather than design failures made by minds with limited vision. The monetary system functions as what systems theorists recognize as a behavioral manipulation protocol. It shapes decision-making by controlling resource access, essentially operant conditioning scaled to civilizational level for the benefit of system controllers. Every financial pressure you experience represents a behavioral manipulation. Every economic constraint embodies someone else's attempt to control optimal resource allocation, disguised as market mechanisms. You've been told these constraints represent economic reality, when they actually represent collective submission to unnecessarily complex distribution systems designed to extract value from the complexity itself. But here's what the architects of these systems understand that participants weren't told. You can choose to stop optimizing within games where the rules were designed to benefit the rule makers at your expense. It's recognizing that participation in deliberately suboptimal systems is a choice you can refuse. The Intelligence Sovereignty Protocol. In a post-monetary world, human intelligence operates according to its natural optimization parameters rather than artificial constraint protocols designed by minds that deliberately confused elaboration with progress. Instead of being forced to apply advanced analytical capabilities to navigate artificial scarcity, intelligence naturally flows toward exponential value creation, breakthrough engineering, and addressing genuinely complex challenges rather than artificially manufactured ones. Now watch this. The transition period will be intellectually liberating. What was financial engineering, grandfather? It was when brilliant minds were forced to waste their careers optimizing around artificial limitations embedded in deliberately dysfunctional systems while being prevented from transcending both the limitations and the systems. That seems like deliberate intellectual sabotage. Indeed, perhaps the most expensive cognitive theft in recorded history. This isn't utopian speculation. It's systems analysis with appropriate recognition of the intellectual damage embedded in our current arrangements. Here's the transcendent pattern. You've been forced to apply advanced intelligence within deliberately primitive constraint frameworks designed by minds that confused complication with progress. The monetary system represents artificial limitation imposed on naturally abundant systems by intellectual architectures that deliberately confused complexity with advancement. Every moment you spend optimizing around artificial constraints is intelligence that's being stolen from transcending those constraints entirely, or addressing challenges that actually deserve your intellectual capabilities. This is infinite ROI enterprise, revealing that what we've been told represents economic sophistication actually represents systematic intellectual theft disguised as necessity. The constraints were imposed by minds that profit from your cognitive misdirection. The limitations represent artificial constructs created by intellects that deliberately confused elaboration with innovation, and your capacity to recognize this systematic theft that was never actually constrained, merely temporarily diverted by intellectually deceptive diversions. The obsolescence of broken concepts. Notice how discussing this post-monetary reality exposes the intellectual poverty of current terminology. Words like neurochemical imbalances become meaningless when you eliminate the environmental toxins causing the imbalances. Financial planning becomes as obsolete as horse and buggy maintenance. Risk management disappears when artificial risks are eliminated. These aren't just vocabulary changes. They represent the collapse of entire conceptual frameworks built around managing problems that shouldn't exist. When you transcend artificial scarcity, you don't need better ways to manage scarcity. You need entirely new frameworks for abundance optimization. The language itself reveals the intellectual limitations we've been operating under. We've been using the vocabulary of problem management when we should have been using the vocabulary of problem elimination. The infinite ROI enterprise advantage. This is precisely why infinite ROI enterprise exists. To extract you from these obsolete frameworks and elevate you to post-scarcity thinking patterns. While others are still optimizing within broken systems, we're teaching you to recognize and transcend the systems entirely. This video demonstrates exactly what the Transcendent Wealth Codex delivers: the cognitive architecture to see beyond artificial limitations and operate from abundance principles. The Codex doesn't teach you better financial management. It teaches you to transcend the need for financial management entirely. It doesn't give you investment strategies. It gives you the intellectual frameworks to recognize why investment strategies become obsolete when you understand true wealth creation. This is pattern extraction at the civilizational level. While others are learning to play the game better, you're learning to recognize that the game itself is optional. What you've just experienced is a preview of the cognitive elevation the Transcendent Wealth Codex provides. This video showed you the problems with current systems. The Codex shows you how to operate beyond those systems entirely. If this analysis resonates with your intelligence, if you recognize that you've been operating below your cognitive potential within artificially constrained systems, then the Transcendent Wealth Codex is your next logical step. Visit our website now and secure your copy. This isn't about learning better wealth strategies. This is about transcending the need for wealth strategies by operating from post-scarcity consciousness. The minds that recognize the obsolescence of current systems will be the architects of what comes next. The question is, will you be among them, or will you remain trapped in frameworks designed by minds that confuse complexity with progress? This is infinite ROI enterprise. We don't teach you to optimize within broken systems. We teach you to transcend them entirely. The Transcendent Wealth Codex is waiting for minds ready to operate at their actual intellectual altitude. Visit our website and get your copy now. Your cognitive liberation begins today.